Welcome to the CEO of Destiny podcast, where you will find the tools to fulfill the purpose of your generation and wildly succeed in the marketplace. And now your host, Andre J. Benjamin.
Welcome to the CEO of Destiny show. I am your host, Andre J. Benjamin, and I am delighted and excited to have with us our special guest. This guest is hailing out of Austin. We just had a little pre-conversation about what it's like in Austin and the joys of it. I want to talk a little bit about Renji. Renji is the founder of Immersed, a Techstars startup partnered with Facebook, HTC, and Microsoft to build VR offices. They've raised an astounding $12 million to date, and Renji's part of 2021's Forbes 30 Under 30, received a master's degree from Georgia Tech, number 3 computer science graduate school in the US, that's impressive, in computer vision and machine learning, was a Techstars portfolio founder, top 10 of 10,000 candidates and top 0.1%, and was the lead software architect at greatbigstory.com and growth hacked at 3 million followers in 2 months. We want to give a warm welcome, a warm CEO of Destiny welcome to Renji Bajoy. Renji, welcome. How are you feeling this morning?
Good, man. Thanks for having me. Good. Yeah, I'm grateful to be here. Really enjoyed talking with you, man. So a ton of energy is awesome.
Come on. Yeah. I was curious about, first off, can you tell me a little bit about your name? It is unique. When I met you, you told me it was, like Benji, but Renji, which was a good way, because then I made name association to never forget it. But can you break down kind of what both of your names mean? Because I'm not familiar with those names.
Yeah. So my parents, they're from India. They moved to New York 40 years ago. But Renji is actually technically a nickname. It's my real name, or my official name, Indian name, is Ranjit, which is spelled Ranjit. But my entire life, people just grew up for whatever reason calling me Renji. Actually, I remember the reason. Actually, when my best friend growing up, his name was Benji. So they would call it Renji and Benji. And so it just stuck. And I think that for me, and by the way, the name means victorious warrior. And so it's funny because I think that there's a lot of significance in people's names. And it's funny how oftentimes people's names kind of are similar to what they are. But it's funny because my entire life, I wasn't a victorious warrior by any means, as far as what the results looked like, but in my head, as far as what I wanted and what I wanted to execute on. Meaning, for example, I remember when I was 5 years old, my uncle gave me for my birthday, so for whatever reason, gave me this VHS that was of this, almost like the math version of Bill Nye the Science Guy. And you teach you really, really cool math tricks. Then I start going to school and I'm just crushing everyone in math. And it's I'm doing 4th grade math in kindergarten or 1st grade. And then fast forward to when I was 12 years old, I was a professional Halo gamer, and I used to just crush people who were, 25, 30 years old playing Halo, and I was 12. It's I was this little kid that would go to the local not Best Buys, Blockbusters, because back then they used to do Halo tournaments, the winner of the Halo tournament, just to get buzz in the Best Buys and stuff, or the Blockbusters. And as a prize, the winner would get a free Xbox or whatever, right? And so I was going around to all these tournaments with a little 12-year-old kid crushing all these 25 and 30-year-old people. They're pissed off because they're just what the heck? How's this little kid crushing us? And it's just funny because I'm not out here battling Xerxes and the Persians or anything. I'm out here I'm not a victorious warrior. I'm just winning in little things. And so even in high school, for example, I whenever I applied myself in a certain area, I learned to get really, really good at one thing. As opposed to just kind of being all across the board, jack of all trades. I really wanted to hone in on one thing, the thing I was passionate about, and get really, really good at it. And an example would be, I was not passionate about homework at all, but I was passionate about crushing tests. And so I had a 2.6 GPA in high school because I just didn't do a homework ever. But then I had a perfect score on the math SATs. And so it's I wasn't a lazy person, or sorry, I wasn't a stupid person, as far as low IQ. I was just lazy. I just didn't really care to do the things that I was told to do, but instead I kind of wanted to carve out my own path. And I think kind of as you look at the story of what God did in my life over the course of these past couple of decades, it makes sense that I'm doing what I'm doing now, meaning I'm not kind of doing the 9-to-5 sort of job thing. Instead, I'm kind of carving out my own path of what I believe is God glorifying and something that is using the gifts that he's given me. And I want to be the best in the world at it, right? So it makes sense. Even as you're reading the credentials or whatever. For me, it's kind of whatever. I'm like, okay, I'm thankful that I have those things. I kind of don't really care about that stuff. It's just people always ask for a little bio. I'm like, all right, well, if you need a bio, here's that. But as I was kind of reflecting on those things as you were saying, I was like, man, I'm thankful that I was able to really hone in on that area and really execute well, as opposed to like just being amazing at everything, right? Like, a home improvement type person and like I don't know, like a person who likes to go jet skiing and like, I'm not doing a ton of different things. I'm kind of just honing in on one thing. And as far as I think my name, it's really, it's not a victorious general. It's a victorious warrior. It's not a person who's leading troops necessarily. It's more so a person who's focused on like individual execution. And I think in our startup, for example, I'm not the best people manager. I'm just a leader that they look to by example. And there's like, let me do that because he's doing that. And then I have other people at Immersed who they're good at people management because that's a necessity at a company and they help out there too. So sorry, long story short, my name, you asked, my name is something that I'm proud of. And it's funny because it's not even the official Indian name necessarily. It's just the digestible version of it. So maybe give it that. If I went around for the past 30 years telling people my name is Ranjit and people weren't pronouncing it right, like I'm just like, I don't how effective is that communication if they're not receiving it? If I can just tell them my name is Renji and it sticks, I'm like, all right, well, it means the same thing. So
that's wisdom. I believe names are super significant and they are blueprints. They're like clues. And I believe actually people grow up into those names. What does the last name mean?
That's a great question. I don't know. Let me Google. I feel like I've Googled this before. Let me see. The Joy name meaning. It's actually my dad's first name.
Absolutely.
It means, I can't even find it. Oh, it means full of joy. Duh.
Let's go.
So victorious warrior full of joy. Yeah, good. It's funny because just in this past season of building this company, it's been a very, very hard season for us as a company. Yeah. And yeah, I just felt like I've been kind of bogged down by a lot of stuff, just the weightiness of the startup, the market conditions, all of that, crypto tanking, just the recession in general. Yes. And it's funny because there are times I would look at old videos of what people like whenever people would like intro me or talk about the relationship with me or whatever, they'd always say things like, Renji's so fun to be around, all that type of stuff. And the past year, when I reflect on who I've been as a person, I'm like, that's not true at all anymore. Rather, meaning for, ages 30 and prior, there are definitely, maybe some ups and downs, but overall, like a lot of people just have fun. And really in this past, like being around me. And then in this past year, to be real, because I've just been so weighed down by stuff, I haven't really been able to be a source of joy for other people. If anything, I've just kind of been just there, right? Just because I'm like just barely functioning, just to be open and honest and vulnerable. Yeah. And so, and all that to say, like, it's funny because my heart is to want to be joyful. My heart is to want to be a joy around everyone else. And I guess God's been teaching me a ton about the harsh realities of what it means to be an individual in our world, and that it's important to be always rejoicing, but also there's a level of heaviness and sorrow that's also important in our world, because you probably met those types of people where you almost can't have a real conversation with them because everything is just jokes and laughter and whatever. Yeah. Whenever you try to have a serious conversation, they kind of like avoid it. And I don't think that that's the solution. I think like it's very clear. I think it's 2 Corinthians 6:10, I believe, talks about like sorrowful yet always rejoicing. Yeah. That's what I think is important to be as an individual, as a person, that though you are full of joy because of your eternity and have a joy of salvation, all those types of things, but the heaviness and the weightiness of today's current world and how you still need to weep with those who weep. How do you weep if you are only joy all the time? It's not easy.
There's a verse in Ecclesiastes. I don't remember the exact address, but it says something about the heart of the contemplative being in the house of mourning. I always thought that was fascinating because it's when everything is going great, a lot of times people don't take time to reflect. They don't self-assess because everything's going great. But when things, even as the world went through that great modification that everybody was going through, and some people are still coming to the other end of it, it's debatable where it's at. But regardless, when it was at its height, that was a challenge for people. And a lot of people talked about, they said, you know what? I don't, and this also is a lead into what the company that you started, and we're going to talk more about that. A lot of people begin to migrate. A lot of people said, I don't like the place I'm living in. I don't like what's going on. I'm going to change some things in my life because I've had this time to slow down and to reflect. So I think that's a very powerful insight. And then I also like the fact that I call it the, people call God, different names, Jehovah this, Jehovah that, but it's like Jehovah Sneaky. I think with the name thing, it's really cool because it's like he gives us these names, and our parents may not, some of them are very deliberate and intentional and others not so much, but also these names are opportunities for people to grow up into aspirational characteristic. So it's super cool. Can you give us a little bit of your origin story and where you hailed from? You told us a little bit about some of the things that we're going to cover in this interview, but can you, such as the gaming, I wanted to hear about that because we have a fun story with that, but talk about where you're from and how did that shape you now?
So my parents moved from India to New York about 40 years ago. I grew up in Queens, New York. That's where my sisters and I were born. I'm the youngest of three.
My barber will be very delighted because they always have him and the other New York barbers always argue about what's the best part, and he always says Queens gets the money. So
Well, it's funny because it's cool to see a level of loyalty for everyone, like whatever borough they're from. One thing that I really appreciate about Queens was I felt like we had very mission-driven people, meaning I remember when my family moved from New York actually to the suburbs of Atlanta when I was 8. And so my only experience in New York was growing up as a little kid until I was 8 years old. And my biggest takeaways or comparisons growing up between New York and Atlanta was in not Atlanta, but the suburbs of Atlanta. The teachers in New York had such a purpose or a mission for why they were teaching, whereas the ones in the suburbs of Atlanta were just kind of chill and not doing it. Because let me rephrase it: suburbs of Georgia. I went from multicultural Queens, New York, to all white Georgia, all white suburban Georgia. And to be real, I think a lot of teachers in the suburbs of Georgia were just very kind of complacent. Whatever, they were here, they didn't give a crap about the kids. They're like, whatever, I'm collecting a paycheck. Shut up, kids, do your homework, that sort of thing. Whereas the teachers in New York, the area I lived in was a pretty rough area, Floral Park, and a dude was shot to death on my front lawn. It's a pretty rough neighborhood. And if you were going to be a teacher at the elementary school that I went to, which was literally the next block over, that was a rough school. All the windows had cages on them. I remember our principal would send us home with slips saying, hey, tomorrow don't wear red or blue because the Bloods and Crips have a shootout, things like that. It's like, if you're a teacher in that type of neighborhood, you're probably very passionate about what you do. And I remember the experience as a student in New York. I loved my teachers. I loved learning. I loved the classroom environment. It was fun. I looked forward to school. Then when I went to Georgia, we were in nicer buildings. They weren't run down like the ones in New York, but the culture was so different. The culture was very only sports and elitist and kind of stepping on each other's heads to get to the top type stuff. And everyone's very consumeristic, very selfish, and it was a very different sort of context. So growing up in the suburbs of Georgia, race was a huge thing. Just race, experienced a ton of racism, especially when 9/11 hit, which I was 10 years old. So really just 2 or 3 years of being in Atlanta. When September 11 hit, little did I know the rest of my life I'd be called a terrorist, all throughout grade school. And that turned me into actually a very angry kid. Actually used to get into a lot of fights. It's funny because you first met me in a context where I'm sharing the gospel and preaching and commissioning Christians. But actually, as a kid growing up, I used to throw tables at other kids. I was before I was Christian, I used to get into fights all the time. Victorious Warrior, I used to slay kids. It was so bad. And I became a believer when I was 19. And so all throughout grade school, man, I was, if they ever called me a terrorist or anything racist, they probably got a face caved in. I remember it was I was in 5th grade and a 4th grader said to me, I still punched the 4th grader. And his 5th grade brother's like, hey, you can't hit my brother. And I hit him. And it was just so bad, man. It's looking back, it's laughable, but you see the nature, the sin nature of humans. It's man, it sucked that the problem of people being racist towards me that existed. And it also sucked that my response was also sin. Trying to fight sin with sin was not a good situation. And so it kind of growing up, all those things and all those experiences shaped who I am today. What I mean by that is I am aware that these are things that happen in the rest of the world. If everything was sunshine and rainbows all growing up, I would be so disconnected from reality. I'd be so disconnected from what's actually happening in the real world. And to be real, I've been playing basketball on the weekends with some of these billionaires. It's pretty crazy. Some of the founders of some of the companies that you've heard of. And it's funny because a lot of them actually did grow up in a very coddled bubble growing up, and they're so disconnected, and it sucks because they have resources. Like legit, one of them is worth $11 billion. If he just even gives 1/10 of that away towards mission-driven things, that has insane impact. But because their upbringing was just kind of, very, they went to private school growing up and all that type of stuff, it's like they're very disconnected from reality. And my hope is in those relationships, we play basketball and hang out and whatever, I'll essentially be able to help kind of bring an eye-opening kind of context or part to the conversation that will be helpful for them to grow too. But anyways, going back to the origin story, all throughout Georgia, or I guess the rest of my grade school, I then ended up moving into the city for college just because I wanted to get out of the suburban context. It was just kind of boring, kind of slow. I wanted to ultimately do something impactful for our world, but I didn't really know what to do or how to do it because my parents were, to be real, immigrants. They didn't really know what could you even do in the US.
They're trying to navigate. They're trying to learn to navigate.
Exactly. And so they didn't really know how to direct me. All they knew was, oh, if you become a doctor or a lawyer, you'll be successful. So they kept trying to push me towards that. And clearly I didn't do that. And so they eventually became proud of me. But anyways, I went to the city because I was like, I got to learn something somehow from somewhere. And so went into the city, like downtown Atlanta. That's where I really appreciated it because I was back in a multicultural type context. I was able to connect with brilliant people. I went to Emory for undergrad and then Georgia Tech for grad school. I was at Emory for pre-med just because, again, my parents thought I should be a doctor and I didn't really know any better anyway. So I did pre-med, but I also did math and computer science just so that because I loved gaming growing up. I loved tech. I remember when I was, I think I was 4 years old, my dad got a Windows 95. And yeah, I was 4 years old. I was born 91. So my dad got a Windows 95 and I loved it. I was on that thing all day. I remember I was learning from like Britannica or something, some like encyclopedia. I was a little kid, like learning about cheetahs and elephants. And like, I was just like, it's funny because, and I was like learning how to read using Britannica. Like I didn't learn it in school. I learned it just because of the computer, because the computer itself was so fascinating. So I knew that I loved technology. So yeah, going to school at Emory was helpful for not only being able to discover that I liked technology, but also because it helped me better understand humans, relationships, really on the pre-med side, right? Because, wanting to become a doctor, you have to learn about human anatomy, how humans are wired, how they work, but also you have to build relationships in that world. It's very highly relational. Whereas the tech side, you could just be a little coder in front of your computer and never have to talk to a human being ever again. So very, very different. But if you're able to bring those two worlds together, technological innovation with human capital, human relevance, human whatever, you bring those two things together, it can be extremely impactful, right? So I thought I wanted to work on like robotic arms and things like that. But little did I know, it was just hard to break into that world. Not just hard to break into, that world is very niche. There wasn't very many, now there's way more companies trying to work on those types of problems. But back then there was like one, and that one also barely had funding. And so it was just like, all right, even if I wanted to work in that space, I'd probably have to work for free. And so I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm not working on that yet because I don't have a nest egg to live off of yet. And so I then decided to just work in the web world. I was 21 when I got my first job as a coder. Within about 2 years, I went from job to job to job, kind of growing up or getting promoted into higher positions. And my last job when I was 23, I was the lead software architect for CNN, the news network, and they had me on a project called greatbigstory.com. And that's where it was essentially the TikTok of CNN. It's crazy because it was TikTok before we knew TikTok would be viral.
Crazy.
And that's why I was able to have 3 million daily active users within 2 months, is because it was that sort of microwave, instant gratification type world.
Absolutely.
And we learned a ton through the project. It was really cool, but I ended up transitioning out, and I found out that greatbigstory.com actually shut down a couple of years ago. I ended up leaving. So they had to find someone else because I was the lead on that. So they had to find someone else to end up leading that. But I ended up focusing on a PhD in computer vision and machine learning at Georgia Tech. But I found out that was going to be like 8 years. So about 2.5 years in, I was like, all right, forget this. I'm settling for the master's degree. I'm going to just try to build something on my own. Because every context I was in, whether it be the web development world, building products for other companies, like me building greatbigstory.com for CNN, or me going to the research lab where everyone there just wants to tinker with drones and self-driving cars and it's cool stuff, but there was never any direct path towards productization or getting it out to the world and having people use it. They essentially would just work on cool tech, talk to the Department of Defense, hey, do you want this? And 90%, 95% of the time, the Department of Defense say, no, we have another version of it. And they're like, all right, we'll go back to the drawing board and work on something else. Just like literally just like wasting our time almost, right? Where instead of going to the department of, like in hindsight, I was like, we could literally just like ask that person who we just said, hey, do you want this thing? And ask them, hey, what do you need? Exactly. We didn't even know to do that. So we were just like, oh, I guess we'll just try to come up with something and we'll be Steve Jobs and we know what you want us to build. And which is not how Steve Jobs operated, even though people say that all the time. And so we would just work on random junk, show it to them. They would say 95% of the time, no, we already have something. It's just like very inefficient, kind of just a waste of time. It was very clear to me that the people who were there and even the research professors who were there were just there because it was a system that existed and they could really live their actual lives that they're passionate about outside of that time. Yep. So they could tinker with stuff and it's like a fun little hobby, but then they go home with their family and friends, which is fine, which is good. It's just their, most of their waking hours that they're spending at their day job, they're just killing their time. So all I have to say, I was like, man, there's got to be a more effective way to live life. And so that's why I decided to start Immersed.
So let's go back. I want to ask you a couple probing questions about in your origin story. So did you know, when was the point that you discovered basically your superpower or your distinct ability? Like when was that point when you were like, no, yes, parents said pre-med or, doctor or whatever the lucrative careers which is smart because that's the thing I actually love about immigrants is they have a mindset of, we want the economic value degrees. We don't want we don't want the study of something random. We want something that translates into dollars. So when was that moment where you discovered that?
Yeah. So I started learning how to code when I was 20. So I was really late. Because the first 2 or 3 years of undergrad, I was very focused on the pre-med side. But when I started thinking, man, I started shadowing orthopedic surgery, cardiothoracic surgery, and neurosurgery. And it was cool because I got to live the lifestyle of it. I would just follow them and I would sleep the same time they slept and I would wake up the same time they would wake up. And we're in the hospital all day. And it was cool because I was able to get into the surgeries, while he was doing a craniotomy and taking someone's skull off and kind of poking the sac that was high pressure or whatever. And then legit got brain juice squirted on me. It was disgusting, but it was good exposure. I think for me though, as I started seeing how the type of dark humor neurosurgeons had to have because their hit rate was super low, the recovery rate of their patients just really bad. And so they just had to have almost a dark humor in order to cope, saying, oh, this guy's probably going to die. It's you say that so lightly. And it was just very clear that they didn't know how to deal with it either. And for me, I was like, well, if y'all don't know how to cope with this, I don't know how to cope with this type of stuff. And I don't know that I want to live this type of lifestyle. And so I ended up deciding to not go the pre-med route because I wasn't the person that was super interested in things like pediatrics or I don't know, whatever different types of doctors there are, dermatology, I don't know, whatever. I wanted to do, because I'm a very surgical minded person, meaning when I see the way I operate in the tech world, I'm highly meticulous. I make sure that every detail is taken care of. That's what surgeons do on the medical side. But on the tech side, I realized that same gifting applies there. It's just, the output is different. I started coding when I was 20 because I knew I was good at math. And I told you I had a perfect score on the math SATs. I just started taking math classes at Emory. And if you wanted to have a math major, you have to take one coding class. So I took one coding class. I haven't told the story in a long time, so I forgot about this story. I took one coding class and actually I got a C- in it in Java. And part of it was I was just so busy with everything else, I didn't really pay attention. And so I was just coding random crap and it just wasn't even working. And so it made sense. You have to apply yourself, you have to really try. But that was the last thing on my mind. I was like, I don't want to take this coding class. I want to be a math major. But then after I got that C-, later that summer, another student told me, oh, hey, I'm taking that same class you took last year. Can you tutor me in it? I was like, I got a C-. So you don't want me to tutor you. He's like, dude, I don't know anyone else who took any of those classes. So can you just please show me at least some of this stuff? I'm like, all right, I'll try. And so when I started showing him some of the stuff I was working on, it started clicking, right? You've probably heard this phrase before. When you start teaching something, things start making way more sense.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. I was like, wait, this makes so much sense. Why did I do it that way? This is so much better. And like, I started really getting good at it just accidentally. And obviously I realized like that was God being sovereign in the process of like humbling me, giving me that first C minus, and then also showing me actually you're good at this thing. You just gotta be humble about it. And so I started taking more coding classes, and it turns out I was actually very, very good at it, and it actually became fun. Anyways, I'm just like reminiscing on some of the really cool projects I used to work on back during kind of my small undergrad bubble homework Java project days where there were no consequences to what you build. Back then, it was
I love it because this helps. The reason why I ask these questions that are probing around the foundation is because I don't want people to ever have the misconception that you were like dreaming in code when you were 7 and 5 and you were doing coding competitions at age 3. Like that's sometimes the misconception is people have is that they came out the womb as a so-called whiz kid, but there was a process.
Yeah, it's definitely a process. Because what I will say is the DNA of what ended up being what I'm working on now, in hindsight, I could see signs of it here and there, like the Halo Pro stuff or even beating up kids and winning fights. I think it's so bad. But the desire for victory or the desire for accomplishing something, being successful, that was there all along the way. And now it's just expressed differently. I'm not fighting with kids anymore. Like
a little more constructive.
Yeah, I'm not fighting with kids anymore. Now I'm fighting with Zuck in a different way. I'm just kidding. It's just a very different type of context. But jokes aside, it's just like I realized that all along the way, though I desired what I desired, God had still orchestrated a story or a path that I would follow. And all along, he knew what he was doing. Like he knew where he needed me to be. And even though I didn't know what the crap was going on, I could see God's love in that by him just like kind of watching over all of this and making sure it needed to go where it ended up going while Renji was making the dumb little decisions that he made along the way.
Can you think back on any couple things? And then of course, we're going to get into the world of tech, but can you think of any either teachers, instructors, or role models that saw basically this dormant gold that was in you in some form and was able to call it out in your formative years? Was there ever any instructors that you that you recognized and was like, man, they actually see more in me than what I'm giving off? Because like you said, there was a lot of external pressures and misinterpretations and just like you said, the sinfulness and the brokenness of people to make fun of and all this stupid stuff that people do they're very cruel in school. It's just real. But I feel like that's the real gladiator school. So I don't know about all this. I think it was the comedian Chris Rock that said, if we get rid of all the bullies, there won't be any companies, like, because they become these arch villains or whatever. So can you think of any instructors that were able to call out gold in you?
Yeah. So, I mean, even till this day, my 3rd grade and 4th grade teachers, they still follow my stuff. Like they comment on my Instagram stuff. Like it's so cool to see how many years ago was that? I was 8 and now I'm 31, 23 years later. They're still following the story. And so I know that they both like sorry, let me cough. My 3rd grade teacher had put me in 5th grade math. And so so she knew that I was gifted in that way. Even when I was 8 years old, little kid, and she didn't have to do that. She could just been like, Mrs. Breen. Yeah, she's awesome.
Oh, shout out Mrs. Breen.
Yeah. And then my 4th grade teacher, she has been an awesome role model to me, meaning though I was the stupid kid that would get into fights and get in trouble, I remember her pulling me aside saying, hey, you can't do this, that type of stuff. She was very long suffering with me. She was very patient and dealt with me really well. There were other teachers along the way that gave me opportunities as far as putting me in allowing me to take the gifted test, and then I aced it, and then I would get into the gifted classes. I don't think that any of the other ones really did a ton as far as just knowing that this is they didn't have any sort of conviction around me in particular, except for my 3rd and 4th grade teachers did. And then also in undergrad, my physics teacher, why am I blanking on his name? I remember his face. He was such a wow, like literally if I read them, like, oh, literally that was his name. It just brain burp, what do you want to call it? He taught me like my physics teacher taught me the importance of effective communication. Sounds so random, but it was so odd. I remember coming to him after class. I was like, dude, in 11th grade, I had a C in physics, but now in his class, I had like a 103 and I was like crushing it. And it was, really just 2 or 3 years later, like from when I was 16 and I took physics versus when I was 19 and I took physics. So 3 years later, from high school versus college. In college, obviously I wanted to apply myself more, but I was like, but you're also just a better teacher. What makes you such a good teacher? And he's like, he loves the puzzle of being able to get these complex concepts to become attractive enough for people to want to be or to feel incentivized to actually retain it. And so many kids in his classes, like his tests were not easy because there were some kids who were just straight flunking because they just, no matter what you would do, they wouldn't give a crap. But he was able to get even the C and B students to letter grade up because they really retained the concepts, and he taught us how to think in physics. And so I think that even him, like giving me like he introduced me to other teachers that he thought would be helpful and all of that. And I think the difference is I was one of the few students who actually appreciated the art of what he was doing. When you think about physics and teaching physics, you don't think about art at all, but the art of his communication ability. And by the way, he's not a high EQ person. It's funny because he's like a robot. Like he's like a robot that's trying to solve, okay, how do I get these humans to understand what I'm saying? And he's very masterful at it. And one of my favorite, Mr. Thompson, why am I forgetting his name? Amazing at what he did. So all I have to say, like, those are the 3 teachers that really stood out to me because of their own unique, different sort of things, if that makes sense.
You didn't call the 4th grade teacher out. You called 2 of them out. What's the 4th grade teacher?
Mrs. Colley. Yeah.
All right, Mrs. Collins. Shout out, Miss Collins.
Yeah.
Can you talk a bit about, I love it. Can you talk a bit about what your definition of the metaverse? Because, it's to be determined in many people's eyes, but how would you say the metaverse is?
Yeah, I think just in simple terms, it's just like a 3D internet, right? It's something where, you and I are doing video conferencing right now, but in a metaverse world, we put on our glasses or our headset, visor, whatever you want to call it, and we would be sitting across a table together, as opposed to this 2-dimensional video screen thing. The reason why people get Zoom fatigue is because, like, my brain is trained to see humans and understand how they are in 3D. But right now, both my eyeballs are seeing the same image, and it's like almost trying to create 2 sides to your face, but I can't really because we're on it. And so you do that for 8 hours a day, you're frying your brain. Whereas in VR, it's pretty mind blowing to people when they first find this out. But in VR, there's no Zoom fatigue because it just feels like real life. It's what your brain was created to do or to consume. And so VR, the only fatigue you get right now is the weight of the headset on your neck. So like for me, like, I wrestled, and so they make sure that you work out your neck and stuff like that. I wrestled in high school, and so for me, it doesn't affect me. So I could legit, it sounds crazy, but I could spend 8 to 10 hours a day with a VR headset on, not straight, obviously, like 2 to 4 hour sessions at a time. Take it off, put it back on, go take a break, whatever. But once the stuff becomes glasses, I mean, 1/3 of our world wears glasses already, and so it's like it's not going to be any different. So I think that when we talk about this sort of metaverse type world, it's going to just be the next evolution of the internet, right? Because the internet right now, go back to, the late 90s, early 2000s, you had Web 1, which was really just reading stuff off the internet, information, billboards, whatever online. Web 2 was, Facebook, YouTube, where you're not only reading, but you're also writing. And then Web 3, which is reading, writing, and then having actual digital ownership, right? And so in a metaverse world where things like digital assets, digital currency, virtual real estate, those things are going to become so essential. Sounds weird right now, but in 5 or 10 years, it's not going to sound weird anymore because you're already going to be using it. So I think that people kind of obviously like make jokes of, let's feed these kids to the metaverse. And like you don't even know what you're talking about. Like, what does that even mean? It's like people just use it some weird buzzword jargon thing. And it's like, it's going to be the next generation of internet or of our internet, man.
So can you, since you hit on it, it's clearly in the pathway of questions that I'm going to ask, but let's talk a little bit about a lot of people's reluctance, resistance, skepticism A lot of people, I even asked people, I was just kind of in a teasing way after everybody had been on Zoom and a lockdown. I kept coming out and telling everybody, like, I would go just even in the grocery checkout line and say, are you ready to just be like fully in? Are you ready to get your avatar? And they're like, no, thank you. After being locked down, people were like, no. So it's just regular people. And I was kind of taking a little side poll, just trying to hype up and being like, they're saying we're going to be fully in. Are you ready? And they would be like, no. I want to see people. I'm ready to see my family. So it's just, I want to hear about your vantage point of, hearing people, because there's many views of how people see it could go. And it depends on open, close, people are, which version is it going to be? Is it going to be Ready Player One, or is it going to be something that is more, everybody's playing a role to shape how it is?
I mean, I think the thing is, like, because we don't live multiple lifetimes, we don't have as much pattern recognition as we probably should. Meaning, like, you probably heard that phrase that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? And so we've seen these patterns before. If you just read a little bit of history in regards to in the early 1900s, where newspapers were a thing that like everyone was getting, it's like, okay, well, this person won't get their face out of the newspaper. And it's like, this technology is, crushing our next generation. And it's like, you fast forward to, the gaming, the Sega Genesis or the GameCube or, the desktop computer, whatever, these kids, they have their screens, they're glued to their screens. And then you have the iPhone, same thing. And then now VR, whatever. But it's funny because think about how the older generation actually adopts the same thing. They're just lagged behind. So do you know of your grandparents that probably read the newspaper? Do you know of your parents who probably use computers now? Yeah. Do you know of your generation who uses smartphones now, and your kids who are now using VR? Well, all that's going to level up soon in the next generation anyway. And so all that to say, like, people can always be intimidated, resistant, whatever, to all of this, but they're going to end up adopting it anyway. And so the reason why that happens is because all of these tech giants are financially incentivized to figure out how do we build a product that people do adopt and do love. Like if people say, oh yeah, I'm never going to use that thing. If Facebook takes note and Apple takes note, and they make sure that if you're saying that now, okay, well, what version of this can I build so that you do adopt it? And people don't realize that more than they think, they're actually a product of the environment. Meaning, so I don't know, let's say 25 years ago, before there was a Facebook, right? Or say 20 years ago, when MySpace and Friendster first came out, I'm sure a bunch of parents are like, why are you wasting your time on that thing? And then Facebook came out, and my parents would say, get off of that thing. Fast forward to today, my mom uses Facebook way more than I ever did. I log into Facebook maybe once every 2-3 weeks. My mom uses it every single day, and she uses WhatsApp every single day. Both of those are owned by Zuckerberg. So it's funny because, again, like, we can be resistant to it, like my mom was 20 years ago. But again, those tech giants are financially incentivized to figure out how to create a metaverse that is compelling, because if Facebook doesn't figure it out, Apple will, and Facebook doesn't want Apple to. Facebook wants to figure it out first. Likewise, if Apple doesn't figure it out, Facebook will, and Apple doesn't want Facebook to. So they are financially incentivized to compete to figure out how do we get even more user engagement, because all of them believe deep down that a more immersive version of this Zoom meeting is going to be way more successful than just Zoom. Zoom is not going to be the way that people are going to use everything.
So what is exciting about, so talk about immersed, and kind of also talk about what's exciting about it for, so in Web 2, they baited a lot of people in with, talking about it in terms of gold rush, right? Like, oh, here's a gold rush. There's an opportunity for this. You can express yourself now. You can have a voice online. Now you're uploading into the economy rather than just kind of observing and, the Web 1, Web 2. But with Web 3, when it talks about the democratization of data and ownership, and even the artists and the creatives having an opportunity to have more of a stake, can you give a little bit of insight as to why you formed Immersed, and what problem you guys are solving and who your clients are? Talk a little bit about Techstars, but just kind of hit these areas, because I would love to hear your insights about this.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of the stuff that has become popular now was not popular way back when I had started in this space. Meaning, well, first off, I only joined the VR space in like 2017. VR started hitting way more of the VR nerds, or whatever you want to call it, like that was all happening between 2012 and 2014. So I was late to the game also. And then fast forward to today, I mean, there are plenty of people who are still late to the game, right? So for me, like when I first entered, really even just Web3 stuff, like I was aware of it back in like 2020. I kind of just like left it off to the side because I was like, yeah, I'm sure that there's some sort of interesting stuff there. But right now I just got to focus on executing on the VR side. And as time had progressed, Web3 started becoming more relevant because Web3 started talking about things like a metaverse, like a digital world. And that's quite literally what I was building. But I started building Immersed because back in 2017, I had noticed that every software development team I'd ever been on or had led, they would have more and more people. Each job I went to from year to year to year, more and more people working from home. And it wasn't common in other industries. It was mainly common in software developments and mainly coders and designers. You would have, back in 2020, I would say 2014, 2015, like 1 of 8 people are allowed to work from home. And then fast forward to 2016, like 1 in 4 or 1 in 6 were allowed to work from home. And so I knew that it wasn't a huge problem. And by the way, that was only in my industry. So if you're talking about the whole world, it's like 1 in 500 able to work from home. So, but the following year, 1 in 200, and the following year, 1 in 50. And it's like,
you saw it was ramping.
Yeah. And though it wasn't a common thing, I knew that in the future, if this trend were to continue, this is going to be a big problem actually, because every software development team I was on, people who were Skyping in back then, it just felt like they weren't even there. Like they were just like live streaming in. It's almost like, people will live stream into a concert or into a church service or whatever off of YouTube. They're not there though. And those who are actually there in person probably don't even realize those people exist. They're just like, maybe someone's watching us online or something. And likewise, I felt the same when I was in the conference room with my engineering team in person. There are people who were Skyping in. I was like, I don't even know who's on there. They're not talking. There's too much lag. Even if they do try to talk, they would like interject awkwardly at the wrong time because they had a 5-second delay or whatever. Exactly. And for them to be able to see what was on our computer screens, it was like a maybe 480p resolution. It was just like not good. And whereas in person we had, our 1K or 2K monitors that are decent resolution, multiple screens, our whiteboards, like we were all there present and we were effectively collaborating really, really well. Whereas those who are remote were disconnected, disengaged. They were just not part of the conversation. So I was like, all right, if this is going to become a bigger and bigger problem in the future, I want to start solving this now so that when that problem becomes an extremely crazy one that is like hurting everyone, let's figure out a way to have a solution ready for that. So I didn't know that COVID would hit. I didn't know that COVID or something like COVID would force everyone to work from home. So that was just sort of God's timing in that. And when COVID had hit, that's when Immerse started seeing a massive influx of eyeballs to our website, a massive influx of users trying to use our product. And as time has progressed and more companies, because you remember in the beginning of the COVID days, people were saying as if this thing was temporary. They're like, yeah, we're going to go back in 2 weeks, or then 2 weeks became 2 months, and then 2 months became a year. But not only that, like now that people are back in the office, even at that, it's now hybrid, where some people are back in the office. Yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, absolutely. This is that.
Yeah.
The world now has shifted to it. When people have tasted it, especially when you had employers that said that was absolutely not possible. And then when people got to that and then they executed, now it was like, well, how can you justify it? I was able to take my children to school. I was able to do this and I was able to execute. I need my schedule to be a mixture. So it ramped up, and the timing of it happened that Immerse was already positioned because you had been working on this problem earlier than it was needed.
Yeah. And I would say all the time to our investors and just our users and our team, we don't want to build this thing when it's needed because it takes time to build it. We don't want to build it in response to any of this. We want to build it proactively and be ready for when it's time to then apply it. And so that, to be real, that's how Zoom blew up, right? Like before Zoom existed far beyond COVID, and it was not doing very well. But then when COVID hit and everyone started optimizing for the best quality feed with the lowest bandwidth necessary, Zoom was the winner there. But before COVID, that wasn't necessary. Like before COVID, you could use Skype or Zoom or FaceTime, whatever, like, because it was general video conferencing. It wasn't for work. But for work, you need low bandwidth stuff because some people are on the road. Some people have like 1 bar on their cell phone, and they have to still be able to have this thing work. And Zoom was perfect for that environment. But now that people are, companies are finding out people don't want to come back into the office, now it's crap. Okay, well, we can't keep using Zoom because Zoom was just a Band-Aid. how do we solve the problem of us being in a, how do we solve the problem of getting people together in the same physical space, even though they're not there? That's where Immerse shines. And that's where AR, VR, like Zuckerberg just announced their professional headset, and Immerse is the #1 app on that professional headset. And so for me, it's like, man, thanks, man. Yeah. And I'm just like, man, praise the Lord that we worked on this so far long ago. And we wanted to really build a product that would make sense in the future. And the hard part is the patience. It's like everyone wants to have a SpaceX or a Tesla that's built overnight, which even Elon Musk took 15, 20 years to do that. So as far as what we're building now, man, the hope and prayer is that as we continue building this world moving forward, that Immerse would be able to make teams feel like they're not disconnected and disengaged. They won't make people feel like they're lonely, but instead you put on a pair of glasses. Five screens. I mean, we programmatically limit that. Technically, you could if you have an M1 Mac, we could put 10 screens in there. It's just we don't want your headset to blow up because the headsets haven't caught up yet. But once Apple announces their headset next year, don't be surprised if Immerse unlocks 10 screens.
And why did you get involved in Techstars, and talk about crowdfunding and how that really, I mean, it's impressive. Like you guys had like the biggest one,
Yeah.
Not a very, little light. Yeah. You guys kind of executed really well.
Yeah. So we went through Techstars in 2017. That was mainly based, like we even went in with a different idea. It wasn't even Immerse. And so we ended up pivoting to Immerse during the program. And the managing director said that we didn't get into the program because of our first idea. We got into the program because of the team. He was like, I knew this team's going to build something, so let me just invest in the people. And, we pivoted towards Immerse, and he was like, yep, that's the idea you got to build. Even though back then it made no sense to most people, but he saw the vision. Then the thing is, it was difficult for 3.5 years trying to find funding because most people didn't believe in us. And then when COVID hit, that's when I got a million texts saying, oh my gosh, this makes so much sense. And that's when I was like, all right, well, I guess we don't have to raise from VCs anymore because even everyday people want to invest. And so let me open up a crowdfunding campaign. And that's when summer 2020, we raised $2 million within 2 days through WeFunder.com. And that wasn't through WeFunder's network. It was just people were following Immersed, and we just forwarded them to our WeFunder page. And then we launched into the Oculus store, because before that we were kind of like a side-loaded app. Yeah, we got approved by Oculus to be in the store. Very quickly became the top non-gaming app in the Oculus store. Then December 2020, I was, by God's grace, I was part of Forbes 30 under 30. And so that brought way more angel investor eyeballs to our stuff. And then March 2021, so 3 months later, we opened up a second crowdfunding campaign, and that raised $8 million in 2 weeks. And both of those rounds broke records each time.
So is it because you didn't see, there wasn't much buy-in from the B2B play that you went kind of straight to consumer? What's the reasoning behind that? You were like, let's go straight to the people versus.
Yeah, because if you think about like Slack or Dropbox, like if the individual consumer finds your product and then they are the champion inside that company that then upsells to their own managers, it's way more organic, way less biased, as opposed to Renji coming, figuring out how to get my foot in the door and like giving a presentation and pretending I'm not biased towards my own product that I'm trying to sell you, and then get you to buy all these headsets. Like instead, if the consumers already have headsets, if they're already using the app, and then they're the ones like from an unbiased perspective telling the managers that we have to pay for this thing, sort of the B to C to B model is way more effective than just straight B2B, in my opinion.
What would you say to people who are you had this great encounter with your faith, and you grew in it, and you're at the place where you're at? What about those that are on the sidelines? What opportunities are there for, what encouragement would you have for people to reconsider or take a second look at the ability to shape, to be a developer, the ability to get in and to, play rather than kind of reactive, waiting to see what happens, about stepping in this time now? What do you see for the future of both the Web3, the open opportunities, the challenges that you think those would be poised to have character and integrity and, uphold the same values that you do in the scriptures? What would you say?
Yeah, I think the cool thing about Web3 is that it's almost like a technology that's put in place as guardrails for humankind, meaning it has enforced, like programmatically enforced open transparency. It has programmatically enforced records. Those aren't things that you can wipe and undo. Those aren't things you can manipulate. It's just as soon as it happens, it is like almost, what's the word, when you think of like fossilized. It's like it's stuck in there. You can't really change that. Whereas current Web 2 systems, dude, you have no idea. For all you know, maybe a Bank of America or a freaking Wachovia or Wells Fargo, whoever, could be, not that they're going to, because there's regulators and people watching that stuff, but at any sort of slip up, that type of stuff can kind of fly under the radar. Humans are inherently, I believe, inherently selfish, sinful. We want what's best for ourselves. And like, just to be real, I don't believe that humans are naturally altruistic.
Yeah.
And allowing to have, or having technology put those guardrails in place so that humankind can flourish, I think it's good. And I think that has direct parallels to what we see in scripture, as far as like the Lord has put certain guardrails for us in regards to what is a life worth living. And we see things as like indulging in things that gratify our flesh. Like we see those things as like, oh, but we want those things. And like, why is God like locking me down and preventing me from doing these things? I remember reading in one of the Psalms about how it's like the branch asking itself to be cut off from the tree so that it'll be free. And it's like, bro, you cut the branch off, it's dead. And so, yeah. And likewise, like you probably heard the analogy a million times of like a train on tracks is way more effective than a train on the ground, right? Having these sort of rails in which you can thrive, it's better than to, and obviously people will be like, well, yeah, well, I want to have an all-terrain vehicle where I can go anywhere. It doesn't matter, right? And it's like, you're missing the point. The point is living life left up to your own devices. If you don't really understand your own human heart and like how even you and I intrinsically do not want what's best for us. Unfortunately, like until God gives us a new heart to be able to see what is good for us, and there's still this tension between spirit and flesh. It's at the end of the day, like the hope is that the spirit wins out, and if you are part of His elect, then you are you are going to endure to the end. But the hard part is, how do you express to the rest of the world who doesn't necessarily believe in those things or necessarily care about those things, who inherently wants what their own flesh wants? It's hard because a lot of these sort of things that you see in scripture, as far as living a type of lifestyle of purpose and devotion to the Lord, it's like, to people that seems like it's a chain, and that's like, yeah, and they don't realize that they're actually chained to their own flesh right now. They're chained to things that do not satisfy fully, right? It might feel good that night, and then the next morning you feel like crap, and you just keep chasing the next thing, trying to find some sort of fulfillment, some sort of purpose, and you don't have that until you meet the Lord. And to be real, like even when it comes to things like Web3, I think people can talk about a lot of these things that are like good for us, not really understand why. I met the founder or the writer of a book called, I believe it's called God and Bitcoin. I think his name is Jimmy Song, and he's a believer, and he's actually met multiple people who, as they get deeper into how Bitcoin works, they actually became Christians through the process. It's pretty insane. Oh no, it's called Thank God for Bitcoin. That's what it's called. And it's a really good book. You should check it out. But he's a super influential person. Like, the head of autopilot from Tesla follows him. Like the Reddit founder follows him on Twitter. Like a ton of influential people follow him. Super solid believer who lives here in Austin, Texas, and awesome dude. He's working with the government of El Salvador to make sure that Bitcoin can effectively become its national currency. But he truly believes that God's going to use technology to win more souls to the faith, which I'm really excited about.
When you think of, as we're wrapping up, I want to, and you tell me how we are on time, because I just have a couple more questions. You're muted.
My bad. So no worries. Like even as we were talking, I actually pushed my next meeting to another 30 minutes, so we're good.
All right, perfect. So, okay, cool. So question, they had, you saw the, did you see the movie, did you see the movie, The First Black Panther? Did you see that movie?
I did not know.
Okay. You know about Marvel though,
Yeah.
Okay. It's like,
You said it's called The First White Panther?
No. The movie, did you see the movie, The First Black Panther? It wasn't called The First
I was
Black
like,
Panther. It's just Black Panther.
I thought you said, first I didn't hear you say black. I heard you say white. So I was like, The First White Panther? Is that like a species or something? Or all right, I guess. No, I've never seen that. I've seen Black Panther. Yeah.
Okay, cool. What do you think was, because I asked this in real time when the movie was big, and they were going on these press junkets and all this. And I just saw like they kept showing these crowds, and they're in Asian countries, they're in European countries, they're in, African, whatever. And people were just super hyped about the movie. What do you think resonated with people about that film?
Yeah, I mean, I think having a sense of tribalism, right? Whether or not you want to actually call it that, like, I guess the reason why our crowdfunding campaigns did so well is because there were a ton of people in the Indian world who were rooting for me, a ton of people in the church world who were rooting for me, a ton of people from my high school who were rooting for me. And the similarity between those three different areas, I think people from my college, whatever, was that they had a sense of tribalism. Like, oh, that's it's like if you have a sports team that you love, like if you love the Seattle Seahawks, for example, like that's your tribe, right? Like that's what you're rooting for. And I think that one thing that I really appreciated about Black Panther was, well, first off, I think that America is not very cultural to begin with, as much as we want to be. We want to be a very multicultural type world, but it's like a lot of people are kind of just not, especially the silent majority. They don't really care to really engage in those types of things. I think kind of centralized loud voices are just in the cities, but then we see kind of the rest of the United States and essentially how Trump won his election. It's like those are mainly people who don't really engage with the culture much. So one thing I appreciate of Black Panther is it gave you a sense of purpose to root for something, if that makes sense. And that exists in other ways, but in other stories, but a lot of it is still sort of has an underlying individualistic type root to it. Whereas with this, they added in a little bit more culture to it to show you kind of like the family behind it and like the sort of the roots behind a lot of what was there. And so I think that what really a lot of people don't realize is that tribalism is good in a certain type of sense. Like I think it's important to still be united together. Like even one cool thing about being an American is part of our tribe is being multicultural, being aware of what other people, because you go to other countries, like you go to Spain and everything is Spanish culture. You go to India, everything's Indian culture. You go to China, everything's Chinese. And it's like, those aren't bad things in and of themselves, but when you go there, like there's no appreciation for any other culture if you're not part of that culture. The cool thing about the United States is it doesn't matter where you're from, our tribe, what we care about is the diversity aspect of it. And obviously you have the extremes where people don't like the diversity of it. So all to say, at least for me, one thing that really stood out was that sense of loyalty or devotion to a specific cause. That makes sense.
I saw those are some excellent observations. So I also saw, I read a lot of people giving feedback of they wanted to see more of Wakanda. And that's kind of why I was asking the question, is because I think that why it resonated on a global level, and especially with this outcry of, can we get more films about Wakanda and all this, is because I think it was the first time in many years on screen that people had saw human relationship to technology not being dystopian. So they saw it being integrated in their regular life. They saw that the people there, they had the farming tribe, they had the people doing things, but they were using different types of technological advances as well. So they weren't being lorded over by the technology kind of being told what to do. The people were living their lives and they were using the technology to, serve their purposes and make things more efficient. So I thought that was fascinating. And I was curious, someone, especially in the tech sector and role.
I think that technology actually does that already a lot more than we think, meaning the only reason why something like a TikTok can even exist is because it's on this form factor, right? Meaning if in order for me to appreciate or be able to use a TikTok type product by going to a specific movie theater that had it on a big screen or something like that, if that was what was required to get that type of app into the hands of people or to give people access to that, it wouldn't thrive as much as it does on a phone. And so it has to exist in a form factor, that already is integrated to society. So here's another example. I remember like a couple of days ago, I was on another podcast and they were talking about how like integration of technology into the current fabric of society. Like I remember, 15 years ago, even 10 years ago when I was, or I guess 8 years ago when I was doing the PhD at Georgia Tech and we were talking about autonomous cars, things like that. Back then, there was this whole thing of like, I think the movie iRobot came out a few years before that. And they had this thing called like a car matrix where all the cars on the road are able to perfectly kind of coordinate with one another for the perfect flow of traffic because they're part of this car matrix. All the cars are talking to each other, all that type of stuff. But in reality, when Elon Musk started creating Tesla, the reason why Tesla started thriving, was able to create full self-driving, was because it was aware of the fact that not everyone's going to have a smart car to start with. And we had to figure out where is society at today, and how do we bring them step by step into a future, as opposed to pretending we could wipe all the cars off the planet and just start with this car matrix, start over. And I guess the point of what I'm trying to get at is, when it comes to any type of technology that wants to find itself to become woven into the fabric of how society is today, first off, I would argue that all technology that is successful has to do that, because we don't have a clean slate. Like even things like Airbnb, right? It's probably one of the most disruptive type technologies. And I say that, use that word very not trite, but very intentionally. Like Airbnb was so countercultural that most people resisted it like crazy. But then when the housing market crisis happened, people were like, crap, I need additional income. Like I have no way to rent this stuff out. No one wants to have anything to do with houses. And then Airbnb found out a way to also ultimately disrupt the hotel industry and like repurpose houses for that. So it actually perfectly wove into our society. Likewise with Uber and Lyft, with the advent of the smartphone, now you can have this in your pocket and there's GPS data and all that type of stuff. Like so my point is, these companies could not exist in other contexts. It had to happen when it happened. Likewise, when it comes to any type of technology, you know, if people say like things like TikTok, like a lot of people point their finger at TikTok to like make fun of it. There's a lot of things I actually think that TikTok did very cleverly, and TikTok is obviously now kind of realizing how addicting of a platform they built, and they're actually experiencing user churn because of its addictingness. What I mean by that is, once a person realizes, crap, I just spent 8 hours scrolling, Absolutely. They then delete the whole app. Yep. And TikTok will start having people deleting the app. And so in order to prevent that, to have longevity, they incorporated this thing called digital well-being, where when you're on the app, you give yourself a timer to shut down the app within, you set the time, so either 45 minutes or an hour, whatever it is. And then as opposed to deleting the app. So TikTok is like, we'd rather you not use this thing 8 hours at a time and then delete the app. We'd rather use it 1 hour a day, every day for the rest of your life. Right. So all I have to say, like, even things like TikTok, those aren't things that screw up the current society. These technologies can only thrive if it's woven into the fabric of current day society. So the reason why Immersed couldn't take off 5 years ago is because people didn't have that problem. There was no likewise moving. Exactly. And so for people to have a fear of, well, I don't want people to be stuck in their apartments and just have this headset on all day. And it's like, I don't want to live in the stacks like in Ready Player One. Dude, that's not where our world's headed. Our world's not like, in order to build a successful metaverse, it's going to have to be woven into society the way it is today. It's going to have to be a digital layer on top of what already exists, because you're right. Most people don't want to live in a dystopian, escapist type metaverse world. They want to integrate both. And so Immerse is focused on creating a complementary or supplementary type of virtual world where at the end, if you're at home in front of your computer screens and you're staring at your wall and like you're just doing your work day all day at your home office, at the end of the workday, you're ready to go hang out with your friends. Well, Immersed needs to create a product where maybe during your work hours, you have a headset on because that's already part of your workflow. And it's more compelling than just staring at your wall. And so when the workday is over, you take it off and spend time with your family and your friends. Where Zuckerberg is pushing a narrative where, well, we want people to like play basketball in VR and surf in VR. And it's like, I'd rather you do that in the real world. And I don't think you're not going to find utility there for a long time. Maybe for kids who, want to be, 6'8" like LeBron James, but they're not in the real world, and they want to do that in VR. Okay, maybe someday you'll see some of that like there.
An escapist, like addition to I could never do this in real life, so I'm gonna go do this here. Exactly. Addition.
It was funny because there's this game that's going crazy viral right now called Gym Class VR, and have you heard of this? It's literally millions of players right now in VR, like millions of daily active users using this in VR now, where everyone can dunk. And so what happens is you have your controllers and like, you're just going up in VR and you're like dunking on this dude. And it's not normal basketball. This is more like slam ball. Slam ball's fun, but it didn't replace the NBA. Street ball was fun. It did not replace the NBA. And you go to Sky Zone and you have like it's the same. It's just a virtual version of Sky Zone, Absolutely. Right? You have these trampolines, you dunk on people, but you do it in VR, and it's you don't get physically tired nearly as much. And it's fun, dude. The smack talk on there is so bad. It's so bad. It's like, you've probably seen your kids play video games. You hear people cursing online. Oh crap, I don't want my kids listening to that. Yeah. It's a bunch of that crap. It's so bad, bro. So if you go to TikTok and type in Gym Class VR, little kids are cursing each other out, just like, yeah, mother F, like, just like dunk on each other. It's so bad, man. The point is, I don't believe that a lot of these things are going to replace the real world version of it if the real world version of it is already enjoyable and convenient. But if it's inconvenience or it's not, or it's unpleasant, I think the virtual version of it will replace it. And I think it should replace it, because if it is a better version of it, then it should.
So when you just alluded to how TikTok had to put in some more guardrails because they saw that they were having churn because people were like, I'm out. Like this has destroyed my life. Now it's interesting that one of the founders in the article had talked about how they kind of made the app knowing that there were broken people and wanted to kind of capitalize off that. But then it's kind of like once it indexed to the point where they, lost users, it's like, oh, wait a minute, come back. What do you think are some ways that people who are developers, so the developers that are watching this show right now that are saying, man, what could I do to gamify or to incentivize almost that combination or hybrid of you spend time in here, but we also incentivize you to go get into the real world and go get outside, get fresh air, go connect with the people.
Yeah. It's funny because my team has been reading this book called Hooked. It's called Hooked: How to Build Habit-Forming Products.
And it's a great book.
Yeah, it's a great book. And it's funny because he makes a great point. And he didn't say this in the book. He actually said this in one of his lectures that you watch on YouTube. Because I remember reading this book and people on my team saying, how do we put guardrails to make sure people don't become crazy addicted to Immersed? And for me, it's like, I'll be real, we don't have the user usage to justify any of this. We're barely surviving as a company. So I'm pretty sure that's the last thing on my mind right now. Yeah. And honestly, unless you're a TikTok or a Facebook or an Instagram or whatever, you are almost nowhere near that. The problem is not that people are addicted to your app. The problem is no one uses your app. And so my point is, until and that's what Nuriel says in his actual lecture. He says, because people in the audience are asking the question, well, this seems like such a powerful tool. How do we prevent people from using it for evil? And he's like, to be real, none of y'all can most of you, 99% chance you're not even gonna be able to figure out how to build the next TikTok. The chances are so slim. So first off, I'm just trying to get you to get an app that people care about to start with. So, but once you become a Google or a Facebook, whatever, that's when you guys start thinking about digital well-being. How do you get people back into the real world? So the suggestions on our team where people say, oh, what if someone's using the app for 4 hours straight? And we don't want people to be addicted to our app. And I'm like, to be real, out of probably 2,000 users, maybe one of them do that, where they're use it, or not 4 hours, but 6 or 8 hours straight, right? I remember one time I saw a user data point that showed that they had Immersed on for 11 hours straight. I was like, okay, that's kind of insane. Yeah, I'm like, what the crap was wrong with this person? But what I realized is that was one data point out of 100,000. So I was like, all right, well, pretty sure the vast majority of users are using this for 1 to 2 hours, and that's actually their way of being able to stay focused. So I wouldn't argue that we, at 45 minutes, we should have gotten them out of the app. If people feel most productive with an hour, 2 hours, for me personally, back when I used to do some of my greatest work before I started Immersed, I would legit be in front of my computer for 4 hours straight because I wouldn't be able to get to that mode of deep work or that level of thinking or that level of comprehension. It's almost like sleep, where if I only get an hour of sleep, I'm not getting much good sleep at all. But once I'm an hour and a half, 2 hours, if you hit that first REM cycle, you're starting to get into some really deep sleep. And until you hit, and people say, obviously you need 8 hours of sleep to have a really good night's sleep. But if I'm constantly getting poked every 45 minutes because it's I'm sleeping too much, it's that's not where I need. Likewise with my work, my work, I compare it to my sleep as far as some of the things that we're building are so complex. Some of the calc driven technologies that we're building, calculus driven technologies we're building, or some of the neural network stuff we're it's so complex where if you don't have 2 to 4 hours just to focus, you're not even going to get anywhere near close to solving whatever problem you're trying to solve. So for me, it's I'm totally fine users using this thing for 4 hours straight if they need to, because yes, it sucks that the form factor isn't what it needs to be once it's glasses someday, but plenty of people physicists in the real world, they need to be in front of their computer screen for 4 hours straight just to get to that level of comprehension because they're working into deep work. And so anyways, I'll just say most people don't really have to worry about addiction as a result of the creation of their app, because most people aren't TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, whatever. I would say though, at the same time, once you get to that point, if your app is that, which the chances of someone listening to this thing or whatever, if you're the next Elon Musk, if you're the next Mark Zuckerberg, whatever, those are going to be things that do become important. And I also don't even think we have to remind them that. The reason why I say that is because just like TikTok, as soon as they realized people were deleting the app, TikTok started going down. It's as I'm saying, it's our world. I really believe God has created a world in which people are incentivized to not just self-destruct, because then you will cease to exist and he will have his way in the end, regardless. Like humankind is not going to just like self-destruct. God has a bigger plan than that. And so the world is like, whether it believes it or not, is somewhat incentivized to head in a direction that is glorifying to God. Because when it comes to things like TikTok, you're scrolling for 8 hours straight. If people start deleting your app, well, then TikTok isn't successful. And so Renji didn't have to remind. Yeah, I didn't have to remind the TikTok people to do that. They realized on their own from the user data that people were already like, crap, this is bad for me. We're deleting this. And then they self-regulated.
So here's a question for you. What are you most excited about right now that you guys are working on? And then also, what was the point in as you were developing the company and you see your team putting stuff together that you're like, man, this is fire. I love this as just a consumer. So I got to guard, like you said, maybe I got to guard myself because I want to be in here for, 15 hours straight. But, I do have a wife, and because you're married, correct? How many years?
Yeah. 6.5 years.
All right, cool. Awesome. So congrats. So
thanks, man.
What are you most excited about with the company, and what can
the thing I'm most excited about right now that we're building is we're building a way for users to remind themselves to get back in the next day. Meaning, like, a lot of our users who are successful are those who have an intrinsic discipline, like really just the A-type personalities are the ones that use our app the most. And we're like, all right, well, what about people who are not naturally very disciplined, right? Like those who don't remind themselves to turn on their headset, connect their screens. Like, we truly believe that users are actually way more productive in Immerse app than without it. And what I mean by that is when you use the Immerse app, it connects your headset to your laptop, it creates 5 screens, and you're in a distraction-free workspace, and you could just get to work for 4 hours of uninterrupted time, and you can enter this mode of deep work more frequently and for longer periods of time. And so really, a lot of users who use our app for 4 hours straight get more work done than people who spend 8 hours just with a normal setup. Because people who just spend 8 hours with a normal setup, they have their phone, they're on TikTok a little bit, then their neighbor comes by and say hi, what up, and like they're not really focusing on their work at all. But if you can get like 4 hours of concentrated time, then you're actually getting way more work done. So what we're trying to do is build a mechanism for the type A personalities, for them to be able to get back into the app and be reminded every day at 9 a.m. turn on the headset, get in the app, get 4 hours worth of work done, or 2 hours or whatever it is, get something done, and then go do what the heck you want. So it's just taking people one step further into better productivity. And so I'm really excited for us to build sort of essentially it's a hooked mechanism to get them back into the app at least once a day. I'm not saying for 8 hours straight. Like I'm sure we're going to want to go from our average user session time. I think per day it's like an hour and a half. I'm sure we want to go from 1.5 hours to 2 hours or 3 hours, just because if people can be more productive for 3 hours straight, it's better than the crappy 8 hours that they barely even do. Right. So it's just, I feel like our world's gonna be more productive if we do things like that. So I'm really excited about that.
Great. Last question I'll ask you before I ask you where people can find you is, I've heard an older, wiser person say that they're learning to do far less in a much more efficient manner or something. There a few things very well is what they're learning to do. What are those few things that you say that you do very well? As a 30-year-old, it's not like you're 70 and I'm asking you this.
Yeah.
You have a greater grasp on it, but.
Right. Something I want to get better at, or something that I am good at?
Something that you are good at currently, that you do very well, that you would say it would resonate with. Both your wife would say, you're good at, and then almost your mom would say, that's always good.
Has to be consistent with people observe, right? I'm the best dunker in the world. Let me think. So the thing that they would say I'm probably best at is, I think that my team would also resonate with this. So like my mom and, my family, my friends, my wife, I think they would all agree that a common theme that multiple of them have brought up is oftentimes the role that I'm in requires me to have a grasp on a lot of different things in sync with each other. Meaning our app has an iPhone app, an Android app to get your phones in VR. It has a Mac, Windows, and Linux app to get your computers, your different types of computers in VR. It has social collaboration. It has a metaverse economy aspect, which is a massive can of worms in regards to digital ownership, digital currency, virtual real estate, all of that. We have some computer vision hand tracking stuff. We have our backend API. So my point is, I can keep listening to what goes on and on. We have so many different moving pieces, and if Immersed eventually wants to do more than just allow people to work in VR, but for them to be able to build businesses in our metaverse and employ people in the metaverse and transact goods and services in this metaverse, like, yes, the core root of that is for people to be productive in VR to start with. But then from there, how do they do, build off of that platform and do a lot more? In order to pull that off, so many of these different moving pieces are necessary to make this perfectly be woven together and be successful. And that is a massive moat for us if we pull that off. But I think that the thing that they would all affirm is that I'm pretty good at being able to make sure that all those different efforts are aligned and going in the same direction. And because I truly believe that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts individually, right? So if we're able to get all these things together, it's going to be increasingly hard for some competitor or someone else to try to build their version of that without having all of the synergistic competitive advantage that we currently have right now.
So you're almost like a great integrator to make these teams work, or all these teams work collaboratively and interdependently.
Yeah. I guess now you bring to mind when you say it that way, you bring to mind, like, I remember I was watching one of the Steve Jobs movies, and he talks about how he's not part of the orchestra. He's the composer that's like playing the orchestra. He's like, you guys play the instruments, but I'm playing the orchestra. So you have all these different pieces that have to come together to create this extremely beautiful composed piece, but he's the one having to do this. I forget about that a lot of the time, but as I kind of put the two side by side, it does remind me of that a lot.
Perfect. Favorite verse, favorite Bible verse.
Favorite chapter is Romans 8, but let me see. Favorite verse.
Or if you don't have a verse off top, person that you relate most to. And you can't say the cheat code and say Jesus, because that's it's always the Bible study answer.
Yeah, I know. No, I don't know if I relate to Jesus as much as I wish I did. I would say probably there are aspects of Paul as far as him being a person who breaks into new areas, new people groups, that sort of thing. I feel like that I'm breaking into new industries and building new relationships in unique ways. But then there's a lot of that I resonate with Peter because of the fact that I always want to please my master, but like I know that I fall short all the time, if that makes sense, right? Like Peter was the guy who, when Jesus told him to let his net out of the boat in the very beginning of the relationship, he's like, all right, fine, I'll do it. And like, he didn't believe that Jesus would do anything. And then little did he know it would be like overfilling with fish. And he's the same guy who cut off the centurion's ear. He's the same guy who, after or when Jesus was being crucified, or like when he was chained up and being whipped, Peter was just like, I don't know who that is. He denied him 3 times. He's the same dude who, after Jesus was resurrected and like was on the shore and Peter was in the boat with this fisherman, he like jumped out of the boat and swam to shore to embrace Jesus. And he's the same guy who, when Jesus was resurrected and he had to build the early church, he's the same guy whose shadow people would be healed by, and the same guy who would preach to thousands of people and thousands would come to the faith. So all I have to say, like, what I resonate with Peter a lot on is, though I know I'm a very sinful, wretched vessel, meaning in and of my own strength, I can't do any of this stuff. I'm not worthy to do any of this stuff. But I'm thankful that I have to like fight tears. I'm saying this. I'm thankful that I belong to God, if that makes sense. Meaning, like, dude, I don't forget my status. I don't give a crap about that, dude. Like, because I have Jesus, that's the only thing that can ever fulfill me. Like, I have that, and whatever he wants to do with me, I'm all for it. And so I'm grateful that I get to be a mouthpiece and I get to, have talks like the one that I met you at and things like that. But I mean, God and I both know who I am, and there's no getting around that. There's no lying about who I'm no perfect person. Me and God both know that. And so because of that, like, I cling to him as he leads me along, and whatever he wants to do with me, I'm down for whatever. Because what else am I going to do? Like, I think another place I resonate is when Jesus fed the 5,000 and they all had their bellies full and they left. And because he was saying insane things in John 6, like, eat my flesh and drink my blood, blah, blah. And Jesus looking at his disciples like, yeah. And Jesus looking at his disciples, he's like, are y'all going to leave too? And Peter was like, dude, where else are we going to go? Like, you're the ones with the eternal life. What am I going to do? Like, if I decide to live a life apart from God, what am I going to do? Where am I going to go? Just like live my life and indulge in everything and then die, and then like be in the ground, or worse, go to hell?
Yeah.
Like, what else am I going to do, dude? Like, I'm going to be God's. I don't own myself, and there's no point in me trying to own myself. It's a legit waste of time. So
that's well stated.
I'll step off my soapbox.
No, it's real talk. It's well stated. Where do people find you? And then also out of a curiosity question I had in the back of my head that just popped up was when you hit that, record-breaking crowdfunding, what was the first thing you did when you saw that? Were you like crying, or were you like, man, I expected this. We did it. We knew it. We worked hard for it. You know what I mean? What was?
No, we definitely didn't expect it. I thought we were going to be somewhere between maybe 300 to 500K. The first one when it hit 2 million, I was blown away, and for sure I was in tears. Like I was thinking about how, like, one of the other guys, one of the guys in our church, he actually cuts my hair, and while he's cutting my hair, he was just like, it was like a couple of days later, he's like, dude, isn't it like kind of crazy that these many people trust you to that extent? Meaning, like, the average check size was like maybe $1,300 or $1,500, and so having hundreds of people give you that average size check, just not VCs, not angels, not high net worth people, just random people who you've met, like, knowing that, like, you walk, it's almost like equivalent of you walk and say, hey, would you give me $1,500? And then you go to each one and just collect it. It's like such a weird feeling. And I told him, I was like, dude, it blew me away because I had no idea that people believed in me that much. Like, I knew that people were watching our stuff and they thought, oh, interesting. That's interesting. It's cool. But I didn't know that they would like trust in that, like trust in my execution and trust that I wouldn't just take the money and run, right? Like go to Hawaii or something, right? And then when it came to the $8 million round, same thing, just an increased level of that feeling. And so it also gives me a massive desire to win, to have a win for them, right? Like, I want to turn that $1,500 into $150,000 if I can. And I want to be able to show them, hey, like, not only did I take the money, but I invested it and returned it, 100-fold if possible. So.
Well, the ROI, the stewardship is massive to you. And that's why people have a lot of buy-in into your leadership, is because they see that, I believe that he's going to work the best to steward this very well. It's an honor to see that. Where can people find you at? And any last words? Because you gave us some wisdom. You dropped a lot of jewels in this interview, even by opening up a little bit the curtain on your origin story. Oh, wait, what's one value that your parents gave you that you really appreciate? Because I know you talked about they brought you here. Yeah. What's one of the values that you still carry with you?
I'm not owed anything. It's hard work. You either work hard or you don't eat and you die. So it's like you're like a lack of entitlement. It's you work, like, if you don't work, you don't eat. Simple as that. Welcome to reality. Yeah.
Perfect. Where do they find you?
Renji.Bajoy on most, or Renji Bajoy on some other one. Like, just Google Renji Bajoy, you'll find them. Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever. Always down to connect. And
your companies, talk about it. Say the last place to find it and how they can jump on. Be like, tell us to buy, tell us to consume.
No, it's immersed. If you buy a Quest headset or any of the new VR headsets, we'll be one of the top non-gaming apps on that store. So you just type in immersed and it pops up. So.
Love it, man. Renji Bajoy, thank you for your time. And thank you for being that warrior that is joyful and that is going forward and is more about the bottom line of serving the master than about, I guess, glorifying self. And it shines. And I know, as you say, yes, all your inner workings, but the greater thing is that though there's been a nature that's been crucified, and that you're raised with him, and he's continuing to shine forth the more you continue to yield. So very encouraged by that. Thank you for giving your time and giving of your talent. And we will speak again. Shalom.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Do us a favor. If this was useful in any way for you, please go to iTunes and leave us a review. Reviews will allow others to easily discover the podcast. If you'd like more information and to receive a free download, rediscover your destiny, go to ceoofdestiny.com. Thanks again, and tune in next time.